Chapter 13, Part 1 of Bel Ami, or The History of a Scoundrel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Bel Ami, or The History of a Scoundrel, by Guy de Maupassant. Translator unknown. Chapter 13. Madame de Marelle, Part 1. Autumn had come. The Duroys had spent the entire summer in Paris, leading a vigorous campaign in La Vie Francaise in favor of the new cabinet. Although it was only the early part of October, the Chamber was about to resume its sessions, for affairs in Morocco were becoming menacing. The celebrated speech made by Count de Lambert Sarrazin had furnished Duroy with material for 10 articles on the Algerian colony. La Vie Francaise had gained considerable prestige by its connection with the power. It was the first to give political news, and every newspaper in Paris and the provinces sought information from it. It was quoted, feared, and began to be respected. It was no longer the organ of a group of political intriguers, but the avowed mouthpiece of the cabinet. Laroche-Mathieu was the soul of the journal, and Duroy his speaking trumpet. M. Walter retired discreetly into the background. Madeleine's salon became an influential center in which several members of the cabinet met every week. The president of the council had even dined there twice. The minister of foreign affairs was quite at home at the Duroys. He came at any hour, bringing dispatches or information, which he dictated either to the husband or wife as if they were his secretaries. After the minister had departed, when Duroy was alone with Madeleine, he uttered threats and insinuations against the parvenu, as he called him. His wife simply shrugged her shoulders scornfully, repeating, "Become a minister, and you can do the same. Until then, be silent." His reply was, "No one knows of what I am capable. Perhaps they will find out some day." She answered philosophically, "He who lives will see." The morning of the reopening of the Chamber, Duroy lunched with Laroche-Mathieu in order to receive instructions from him, before the session, for a political article the following day in La Vie Francaise, which was to be a sort of official declaration of the plans of the cabinet. After listening to Laroche-Mathieu's eloquence for some time, with jealousy in his heart, Duroy sauntered slowly toward the office to commence his work, for he had nothing to do until 4 o'clock, at which hour he was to meet Madame de Marelle at Rue de Constantinople. They met there regularly twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. On entering the office, he was handed a sealed dispatch. It was from Mme. Walter, and read thus: "It is absolutely necessary that I should see you to day. It is important. Expect me at 2 o'clock at Rue de Constantinople. I can render you a great service. Your friend until death, Virginie." He exclaimed, "Heavens, what a bore!" and left the office at once, too much annoyed to work. For 6 weeks he had ineffectually tried to break with Mme. Walter. At 3 successive meetings she had been a prey to remorse, and had overwhelmed her lover with reproaches. Angered by those scenes, and already weary of the dramatic woman, he had simply avoided her, hoping that the affair would end in that way. But she persecuted him with her affection, summoned him at all times by telegrams to meet her at street corners, in shops, or public gardens. She was very different from what he had fancied she would be, trying to attract him by actions ridiculous in one of her age. It disgusted him to hear her call him my rat, my dog, my treasure, my jewel, my blue bird, and to see her assume a kind of childish modesty when he approached. It seemed to him that, being the mother of a family, a woman of the world, she should have been more sedate, and have yielded, with tears if she chose, but with the tears of a Dido and not of a Juliette. He never heard her call him little one, or baby, without wishing to reply old woman, or to take his hat with an oath and leave the room. At first they had often met at Rue de Constantinople, but Duroy, who feared an encounter with Mme. de Marelle, invented 1,001 pretexts in order to avoid that rendezvous. He was therefore obliged to either lunch or dine at her house daily, when she would clasp his hand under cover of the table, or offer him her lips behind the doors. Above all, Georges enjoyed being thrown so much in contact with Suzanne. She made sport of everything and everybody with cutting appropriateness. At length, however, he began to feel an unconquerable repugnance to the love lavished upon him by the mother. He could no longer see her, hear her, nor think of her without anger. He ceased calling upon her, replying to her letters, and yielding to her appeals. She finally divined that he no longer loved her, and the discovery caused her unutterable anguish. But she watched him, followed him in a cab with drawn blinds to the office, to his house, in the hope of seeing him pass by. He would have liked to strangle her, but he controlled himself on account of his position on La Vie Francaise, and he endeavored by means of coldness, and even at times harsh words, to make her comprehend that all was at an end between them. Then, too, she persisted in devising ruses for summoning him to Rue de Constantinople, and he was in constant fear that the two women would some day meet face to face at the door. On the other hand, his affection for Mme. de Marelle had increased during the summer. They were both Bohemians by nature. They took excursions together to Argenteuil, Bougival, Maison, and Poissy, and when he was forced to return and dine at Mme. Walter's, he detested his mature mistress more thoroughly, as he recalled the youthful one he had just left. He was congratulating himself upon having freed himself almost entirely from the former's clutches when he received the telegram above mentioned. He reread it as he walked along. He thought, "What does that old owl want with me? I am certain she has nothing to tell me except that she adores me. However, I will see. Perhaps there is some truth in it. Clotilde is coming at 4. I must get rid of the other one at 3 or soon after, provided they do not meet. What jades women are! As he uttered those words, he was reminded of his wife, who was the only one who did not torment him. She lived by his side and seemed to love him very much, at the proper time, for she never permitted anything to interfere with her ordinary occupations of life. He strolled toward the appointed place of meeting, mentally cursing Mme. Walter. I will receive her in such a manner that she will not tell me anything. First of all, I will give her to understand that I shall never cross her threshold again. He entered to await her. She soon arrived, and seeing him, exclaimed: "Ah, you received my dispatch. How fortunate!" "Yes, I received it at the office, just as I was setting out for the Chamber. What do you want?" he asked ungraciously. She had raised her veil in order to kiss him, and approached him timidly and humbly, with the air of a beaten dog. "How unkind you are to me! How harshly you speak! What have I done to you? You do not know what I have suffered for you." He muttered: "Are you going to begin that again?" She stood near him awaiting a smile, a word of encouragement, to cast herself into his arms, and whispered: "You need not have won me to treat me thus. You might have left me virtuous and happy. Do you remember what you said to me in the church, and how you forced me to enter this house? And now this is the way you speak to me, receive me. My God, how you maltreat me!" He stamped his foot and said violently: "Enough, be silent. I can never see you a moment without hearing that refrain. You were mature when you gave yourself to me. I am much obliged to you, I am infinitely grateful, but I need not be tied to your apron strings until I die. You have a husband and I a wife. Neither of us is free. It was all a caprice, and now it is at an end." She said: "How brutal you are, how coarse and villainous! No, I was no longer a young girl, but I had never loved, never wavered in my dignity." He interrupted her: "I know it, you have told me that 20 times, but you have had 2 children." She drew back as if she had been struck. "Oh, Georges!" And pressing her hands to her heart, she burst into tears. When she began to weep, he took his hat. "Ah, you are crying again. Good evening. Is it for this that you sent for me?" She took a step forward in order to bar the way, and drawing a handkerchief from her pocket, she wiped her eyes. Her voice grew steadier. "No, I came to give you political news, to give you the means of earning 50,000 francs, or even more if you wish to." Suddenly softened, he asked: "How?" "By chance, last evening, I heard a conversation between my husband and Laroche. Walter advised the minister not to let you into the secret, for you would expose it." Duroy placed his hat upon a chair and listened attentively. "They are going to take possession of Morocco." "Why, I lunched with Laroche this morning, and he told me the cabinet's plans." "No, my dear, they have deceived you, because they feared their secret would be made known." "Sit down," said Georges. He sank into an armchair, and she drew up a stool and took her seat at his feet. She continued: "As I think of you continually, I pay attention to what is talked of around me." And she proceeded to tell him what she had heard relative to the expedition to Tangiers, which had been decided upon the day that Laroche assumed his office. She told him how they had little by little bought up, through agents who aroused no suspicions, the Moroccan loan, which had fallen to 64 or 65 francs. How, when the expedition was entered upon, the French government would guarantee the debt, and their friends would make 50 or 60 millions. He cried: "Are you sure of that?" She replied: "Yes, I am sure." He continued: "That is indeed fine. As for that rascal of a Laroche, let him beware. I will get his ministerial carcass between my fingers yet." Then, after a moment's reflection, he muttered: "One might profit by that." "You too can buy some stock," said she. "It is only 72 francs." He replied: "But I have no ready money." She raised her eyes to his, eyes full of supplication. "I have thought of that, my darling, and if you love me a little, you will let me lend it to you." He replied abruptly, almost harshly: "No, indeed." She whispered imploringly: "Listen, there is something you can do without borrowing money. I intended buying 10,000 francs worth of the stock. Instead, I will take 20,000 and you can have half. There will be nothing to pay at once. If it succeeds, we will make 70,000 francs. If not, you will owe me 10,000, which you can repay at your pleasure." He said again: "No, I do not like those combinations." She tried to persuade him by telling him that she advanced nothing, that the payments were made by Walter's bank. She pointed out to him that he had led the political campaign in La Vie Francaise, and that he would be very simple not to profit by the results he had helped to bring about. As he still hesitated, she added: "It is in reality Walter who will advance the money, and you have done enough for him to offset that sum." "Very well," said he, "I will do it. If we lose, I will pay you back 10,000 francs." She was so delighted that she rose, took his head between her hands, and kissed him. At first he did not repulse her, but when she grew more lavish with her caresses, he said: "Come, that will do." She gazed at him sadly. "Oh, Georges, I can no longer even embrace you." "No, not today. I have a headache." She reseated herself with docility at his feet and asked: "Will you dine with us to morrow? It would give me such pleasure." He hesitated at first, but dared not refuse. "Yes, certainly." "Thank you, dearest." She rubbed her cheek against the young man's vest. As she did so, one of her long black hairs caught on a button. She twisted it tightly around, then she twisted another around another button, and so on. When he rose, he would tear them out of her head, and would carry away with him unwittingly a lock of her hair. It would be an invisible bond between them. Involuntarily he would think, would dream of her. He would love her a little more the next day. Suddenly he said: "I must leave you, for I am expected at the Chamber for the close of the session. I cannot be absent to day." She sighed: "Already?" Then adding resignedly: "Go, my darling, but you will come to dinner to morrow." She rose abruptly. For a moment she felt a sharp, stinging pain, as if needles had been stuck into her head, but she was glad to have suffered for him. "Adieu," said she. He took her in his arms and kissed her eyes coldly. Then she offered him her lips, which he brushed lightly as he said: "Come, come, let us hurry. It is after 3 o'clock." She passed out before him, saying: "To morrow at 7." He repeated her words, and they separated. Chapter 13. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.